They told her the door was closed. They told her the chapter was over. But no one, not even her fiercest critics, expected the palace to strike like this. In the dead of night, without warning, a message slipped through the cracks of Buckingham Palace communications. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was cold, clinical, devastating. And in those few lines, Meghan Markle's royal future, the very identity she built her brand around, began to collapse in real time. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why now? Why, after all this time, did King Charles take this step? A move so ruthless, so definitive, that even seasoned royal watchers were left stunned. Is it revenge? A reassertion of power? Or something darker? Let's be very clear. The timing of this announcement is not random. It's a calculated strike. A surgical removal of the last remaining thread tying Meghan Markle to the monarchy she walked away from. Or rather, the monarchy that claimed she betrayed them. Because make no mistake, this isn't just about titles. This is about control, about legacy, about rewriting the narrative of one of the most controversial royal sagas of the modern era. And at the center of it all, a woman who was once hailed as the modernizer of the monarchy, a breath of fresh air, a new Diana. Before the narrative curdled, before the whispers turned into headlines, before the fairy tale curdled into something far more combustible. So let's get right into it, because what's unfolding now isn't just another scandal. It's the culmination of everything we were told to ignore, everything that got swept under the rug. And the people who once rolled out the red carpet for Meghan, they're now rolling it back, inch by inch, and she may never be allowed to walk on it again. It started with a document. Quiet, unassuming, a mere clarification, they said, just a procedural update. But behind that sterile language was a very specific, very strategic blow. Meghan Markle is no longer permitted to use her royal titles, Duchess of Sussex, HRH, in any public or commercial context. Not discouraged, not informally advised, banned, prohibited, restricted. And this wasn't a leak. This was confirmed by the palace. And what's more, it was signed off by King Charles himself. Now pause, because that alone is historic. No senior royal, especially one still married to a prince of the blood, has ever been subject to this kind of post-exit censorship. Not even Prince Andrew, disgraced as he is, has been legally gagged from using his titles in public forums. But Meghan? She's been slapped with a velvet-gloved muzzle and told, in no uncertain terms, you are no longer part of the institution, and you will not trade on it. But the question isn't just what happened. It's why. Why did Charles, the man who once walked Meghan down the aisle in front of millions, suddenly draw this hard line in the sand? Because insiders say this wasn't just about protocol. It was personal. And here's where things get especially explosive, because sources suggest that what triggered this sudden move wasn't a legal technicality. It wasn't a media report. It wasn't a slip-up on Meghan's podcast. It was a direct provocation. Something Meghan said or planned to do publicly that crossed a royal red line. And not just any line. Anne's line, William's line, Charles's legacy line. You're going to want to hear this. Now, let's rewind just a bit. Over the past 2 years, Meghan has been slowly reintroducing the Duchess of Sussex branding into her public life. Not overtly, not loudly, but it was there, on book jackets, in Netflix credits, on event posters, at charity fundraisers. You saw the titles, the crests, the Royal Sussex Foundation branding that once dissolved after Megxit slowly reappear like ghosts from a palace long burned. To the public, it looked harmless, maybe even charming. After all, isn't she still married to Prince Harry? Isn't she still technically a duchess? Yes, technically. But behind the scenes, the palace had been watching, and they were not amused. Especially when Meghan began shopping a new media project to streaming platforms. A lifestyle show, insiders claim, involving themes of empowerment, parenting, fashion, and philanthropy. Sounds innocent, right? Until her pitch decks allegedly described her as Duchess Meghan, humanitarian, royal icon. That, insiders say, was the final straw. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. To the monarchy, Meghan isn't just a rogue duchess. She's a threat to the crown's narrative. A wild card with her own stage, her own fans, her own platform. one that can't be controlled by royal advisors or PR handlers. And worse, one who knows exactly what to say and when to dominate the global headlines. That scares them. That always has. But it's not just fear. It's fury. Royal insiders say Charles and William have all voiced frustrations in private about Meghan's perceived refusal to respect the boundaries of her exit agreement. They believe the titles were meant to be retired, not rebranded. And Charles? He's reportedly been caught between conflicting instincts for years, the father who wanted peace and the king who needed order. But after the Queen's death, that balance shifted. The gloves came off. Because now, Charles is not just a father. He's the sovereign. And that means protecting the crown, even if it means cutting off his son's wife, publicly and permanently. Still, the emotional weight of this can't be overstated. This isn't just a legal redefinition. This is a complete symbolic decapitation. What is a duchess without her title? What is a royal without a crown? What is Meghan Markle, the former actress, the ex-royal, the global influencer, without the one thing that made her story mythic? The palace seems to have made its answer very clear. She's a liability. And liabilities don't get coats of arms. But here's the real twist, the part that sets this moment apart from every previous royal clash. This time, the palace didn't just restrict Meghan. They made it public, deliberate, measured, official. This wasn't leaked by tabloids. It was announced by the establishment itself, cool, precise, final. And the message was unmistakable. This is war. And war has rules. Meghan broke them. Now she pays the price. But what's still unknown, what's sending shockwaves through Montecito, Windsor, and everywhere in between, is what else the palace is planning. Because if they've now set a precedent that royal titles can be retracted or restricted after a public fallout, what's next? Will Harry be next? Will Archie and Lilibet lose their future titles? Will history be rewritten, not with violence, but with silence? Because erasure, in royal circles, is the most powerful weapon of all. And now, Meghan faces her biggest crisis yet, not from tabloids, not from Twitter, not from ex-palace staffers, but from the monarchy itself. A system she once tried to modernize, now turning its full weight against her. This is no longer just a family feud. This is a constitutional reckoning. And Meghan's response? Sources say she's furious, that she feels cornered, that she's not done fighting. Because if the palace thought this would silence her, they may have just reignited her fire. But what Meghan does next, whether defiance, legal retaliation, or a full public expose, could change the face of this monarchy forever. And the most shocking part? We're only getting started. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the monarchy could erase you? Not with drama, not with confrontation, but with paperwork. No cameras, no press conference, no dramatic speech from the throne. Just a few lines of legalese, signed under royal seal, and suddenly, everything changes. That's what happened. In the early hours of a Tuesday morning, while most of the UK was still asleep and Montecito had yet to finish its last round of espresso martinis, the royal household's official website updated one small but catastrophic section under the public engagement and representation guidelines. Buried beneath formal declarations about event protocol, emblem usage, and title etiquette was a devastating line. A new rule. Clear. Absolute. Cold. The titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex shall not be used in any official or commercial capacity by parties residing outside of the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom. That's it. No drama. No screaming headlines. Just precision. But for Meghan Markle, that one sentence was a nuclear detonation. Because while the palace has always discouraged the use of royal titles post-Megxit, this was an iron curtain slamming down. A binding restriction. A clear sign from the top. Your association with this institution is over. So who signed off on it? Who wrote it? And more importantly, what was Meghan planning that provoked the crown to drop the hammer? Let's dig deeper, because behind that single line is a web of calculated fury, strategic timing, and a final royal middle finger. And trust me, it didn't come out of nowhere. First, the timing. Why now? Why would King Charles, in the midst of juggling cancer recovery, Commonwealth duties, and family diplomacy, suddenly greenlight a public clarification aimed squarely at his daughter-in-law? Insiders say it wasn't sudden at all. In fact, This memo had been drafted for months, maybe longer. According to an ex-courtier who once served under Queen Elizabeth, discussions about Meghan's public usage of the title have been happening since at least 2022. But Charles didn't want to escalate it. He hoped she'd self-regulate. Self-regulate. That hope was shattered when, earlier this year, Meghan's team began quietly shopping a new commercial venture to several international media partners. A lifestyle platform, a digital media hub, branded under a familiar name, the Duchess Collective. Yes, you read that right. Multiple sources confirm that in the decks and branding packages circulated to potential investors, Meghan referred to herself not as Meghan Markle, not even as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, but as the Duchess. Elegant, ambiguous, but unmistakably royal. And that was the spark. Because from the palace's point of view, this wasn't just about protocol. It was about monetization, about image, about control of the crown's intellectual property. And if Meghan, a non-working royal who exited the monarchy on her own terms, was preparing to brand an entire media empire using a title she no longer actively served under, that crossed a line. A big one. The internal reaction at the palace was swift, if silent. We're told the king's private secretary received the dossier on a Friday afternoon, compiled by senior communications officers and legal advisors. It wasn't dramatic. It was factual, meticulously annotated. Attached was a document labeled, Projected Misuse of Title, Strategic Response. It included screenshots of public promotional materials, archived tweets, event posters, leaked slides from Meghan's proposed media pitch, each one bearing variations of the title, Duchess Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, the Duchess. The team's conclusion? Meghan was actively, deliberately, and publicly identifying herself as a representative of the crown, while operating independently in the commercial sphere. In short, unauthorized representation. And in the monarchy's eyes, that wasn't just problematic. That was dangerous. Because the monarchy isn't just a family. It's a brand, a legal entity, a symbol of state. Every title, every insignia, every crest and royal monogram is protected under strict heraldic laws. You can't just slap a crown on your Instagram and call it heritage. Not without permission. So when Meghan started inching closer to that territory again, just as the king was trying to restore institutional stability, the palace acted. They activated what sources call the Sussex Protocol, a contingency plan drafted years earlier in the quiet aftermath of the Sandringham Summit. One that anticipated this very moment. And at the heart of that protocol, a single, powerful tool, the Royal Memo. So what exactly is the Royal Memo? Contrary to how it sounds, it's not a fancy scroll sealed with wax and carried by a man in white gloves. It's more dangerous than that. It's a bureaucratic sledgehammer, drafted by the Lord Chamberlain's office, reviewed by senior legal counsel, and approved by the monarch. A document that carries the full force of tradition and legality. It doesn't just suggest policy, it defines it. And once published, it becomes gospel within the institution. This particular memo was short, under 800 words, according to leaks, but surgical in its implications. Not only did it limit Meghan's ability to use her royal title for any commercial venture, it also included new restrictions on royal styling in social media bios, production credits, product packaging, and media appearances. In other words, even if Meghan isn't saying the word Duchess out loud, if the implication is there, she's in violation. Think about that. Even subtle associations, like naming a project Archer Royal, or appearing in a documentary where she's introduced with her title, could now be flagged. The memo doesn't strip the title. That would require parliamentary intervention, but it does neutralize its power. It renders it functionally inert. A crown without authority. A duchess without domain. And how did Meghan find out? Not with a phone call. Not with a private letter. According to reports, Meghan learned of the memo's publication online at the same time as the public. Through a third-party text. From a lawyer, not a family member. She was blindsided. Utterly humiliated, one Montecito source said. That's not just speculation. People close to her say she was in disbelief. That she assumed if any action was going to be taken, she would have been consulted, informed, negotiated with. But no, the palace didn't want a negotiation. They wanted a message. And they sent it loud and clear. Now here's where it gets even darker. Some believe this wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a warning, a strategic shot across the bow from King Charles, meant not just for Meghan, but for Harry, because Harry still holds the title of Duke of Sussex. And while this memo focuses on Meghan's use of the titles, it sets a precedent, one that could be extended, amplified, even codified into law. In other words, if Harry attempts similar brand extensions in the future, if he dares revive the Sussex royal name or leverage the dukedom in a commercial sense, the palace now has ammunition to block it. It's the beginning of a framework, a quiet rewrite of the rules. And it all started with a memo. The reaction? Explosive. Social media lit up within minutes. Royal commentators scrambled to dissect the wording. American networks reached out to palace spokespeople for clarification. Meghan's fans cried foul. Meghan's critics said, finally. And neutral observers? They asked the most important question of all. Why now? What really triggered this? Was it the upcoming lifestyle brand? The leaked email pitch? Or was it something else entirely? A conversation we haven't heard yet. A betrayal behind the scenes. A secret deal broken. Because according to multiple insiders, this memo wasn't just about what Meghan did. It was about what she planned to do next. A move so bold, so globally visible, that the palace knew it had to strike first, before the Duchess turned Duchess and name only became Duchess's brand. And what was Meghan preparing? What project was about to go public? What bombshell comeback had Montecito quietly built? One that now lies in ashes. You'll find out, because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does a king say when he's done playing the father? That's the question that echoed through the halls of Clarence House, and later down the corridors of Buckingham Palace, when King Charles made the decision. Not just to approve the royal memo, not just to clamp down on Meghan's title, but to finally say the thing he'd held back for 4 long, chaotic years. Enough. It didn't come through the press. It didn't arrive in the form of a public speech or grand proclamation. It came, reportedly, in the form of a private message, handwritten, no aides, no assistants, and delivered in a sealed envelope, directly to his son, and in it, a royal ultimatum. Sources close to the situation say it was one of the most painful communications King Charles has ever sent, because it wasn't just about protocol. It was personal, brutally personal. And what he told Harry behind the scenes may have set off a chain reaction so powerful, so irreversible, that even Charles's closest advisors begged him to reconsider. But he didn't. He was done waiting. Done hoping Harry and Meghan would self-correct. Done pretending the Sussexes could be contained with smiles and silence. This was no longer a family issue. This was a threat to the monarchy's future. So what triggered this private showdown? To understand the fury brewing behind the palace walls, you need to rewind to a single week, just before the memo was released. A flurry of meetings, cross signals, and a final straw that insiders say was as insulting as it was bold. That week, Meghan had reportedly secured a tentative agreement to appear as a keynote speaker at an international summit in New York, a high-profile women's empowerment event tied to the UN, no less. A glossy stage, cameras, political figures, corporate sponsors, and the promo materials? They labeled her as HRH, the Duchess of Sussex, global humanitarian and advocate. You read that right. HRH, Her Royal Highness. The very styling Meghan and Harry voluntarily relinquished as part of the Sandringham Agreement in 2020, now plastered across promotional media in Times Square. That, according to multiple royal sources, is what pushed Charles over the edge. Because here's what most people don't know. While titles like Duke and Duchess are technically retained unless stripped by Parliament, HRH is not a birthright. It is a privilege, a style, that can be revoked or prohibited by the monarch at any time. And it had already been removed. Quietly, respectfully. Yet there it was again, in flashing lights. At a commercial event. In another country. Representing the crown, without the crown's permission. That's when Charles sat down to write the letter. He didn't dictate it. He didn't type it. He wrote it in his own hand, something he rarely does outside of family condolences and formal invitations. It wasn't long, under 200 words, according to leaks, but it was firm and final. Insiders say the letter was addressed directly to Prince Harry, not Meghan, and in it, Charles reportedly expressed disappointment, concern, and most notably a decision. He told Harry that if Meghan continued to misuse royal stylings, HRH, Duchess, or otherwise, the palace would be forced to make a public statement clarifying and restricting their use. Not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but out of duty, to the crown, to the late queen, to the future of the monarchy itself. Now here's where the contradiction explodes, because Harry, by most accounts, never intended to provoke his father. According to multiple sources, Harry was blindsided by the promo campaign. He allegedly had no knowledge that Meghan's team had used the HRH styling. And when the blowback hit, he tried to calm the waters by reaching out privately. But it was too late. The wheels had turned. Charles had already signed off on the memo. The legal language had been drafted. The communications office was briefed. There was no going back. In fact, palace aides say Charles had waited long enough. Through the Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the Spotify drama, the coronation absence, and now this? He wasn't going to wait for the next PR disaster. He was going to prevent it. So, the letter wasn't a warning. It was a boundary. And when Harry received it, insiders say he broke down. According to two separate sources who've spoken to people close to the Sussex camp, Harry took the letter hard. Harder than anyone expected. He felt like the door was closing. Not just to the institution, but to his father, one insider said. He's always believed there was a chance to mend things. But this letter, it read like a final verdict. The emotional fallout was intense. One report claims Harry called his father directly, not through assistants, not through aides, to try to speak man to man. But the call didn't go well. There was shouting. There were tears. There was silence. And at the end of it, a dial tone. Because Charles wasn't budging. This wasn't just about titles anymore. It was about trust. But what was Charles really protecting? Some say it's about the monarchy's optics. The crown must appear neutral, impartial, above commercial interests. If Meghan is running businesses under a royal name, it undermines that image. Others say it's about control. The Sussexes have become global influencers, launching brands, documentaries, and political statements, all with the residual glow of royal prestige. And that glow, however faint, still reflects on the monarchy. But there's a third theory, one that's rarely said out loud. It's about legacy. Charles is an aging king. His reign may be shorter than his mother's. He's trying to stabilize the monarchy for the next generation. For William, for George, for the line of succession. And Meghan's continued use of royal titles, however subtle, poses a threat to that vision. Not because she's dangerous, but because she's independent, uncontrolled, unpredictable, unsilenced. And that, in the eyes of an institution built on uniformity, is the ultimate liability. But here's the question no one is asking. Why didn't Charles just strip the title outright? If he truly wanted to send a message, why not remove the Duchess of Sussex title altogether? Why the restriction and not the removal? Because, insiders whisper, that option was on the table. In fact, in the days leading up to the memo, palace legal teams reportedly explored the possibility of full revocation, which would require a formal letters patent and likely involve Parliament. But Charles chose not to. Why? Because, despite everything, despite the pain, the embarrassment, the drama, he still loves his son. And removing Meghan's title entirely? That would be crossing a line he wasn't ready to cross. Not yet. But make no mistake. If the rules continue to be pushed, if the restrictions are ignored again, if another HRH surfaces in a glossy press release, that line might not hold. Because Charles has made his position clear. Respect the boundary or face the consequences. And Meghan? Sources say she's furious, not just about the restriction, but about the process. No consultation, no warning, no collaboration, just a private letter to her husband. A letter that said, in essence, tell your wife to stand down. To her, that felt like erasure, a silencing, and she's not going to take it quietly. According to insiders, Meghan has already consulted her legal team in California. She's exploring what, if any, international protections she has when it comes to using Sussex as part of her personal identity. And more explosively, she's reportedly preparing a public response. Whether in an interview, a statement, or a strategically timed podcast, she's said to be furious and ready. Because in her eyes, this was never about protocol. It was about punishment. And the one thing Meghan Markle won't tolerate, not anymore, is being punished for existing on her own terms. But while Meghan is preparing her response, another member of the firm is preparing their next move. Because Charles wasn't acting alone, and the pressure that led to his ultimatum, it didn't just come from within his heart. It came from another royal power broker, one whose influence is quiet, sharp, and deeply respected. A woman who doesn't give interviews, who doesn't smile for the cameras, who doesn't forget disobedience. Because when Princess Anne enters the room, the conversation changes, and her role in this drama will turn everything on its head. No one crosses Princess Anne. Not courtiers, not aides, not even kings. She doesn't yell. She doesn't gossip. She doesn't scheme. But when she speaks, when she gives that single cutting glance across the table, when she says 5 measured words instead of 20, the room falls quiet. Even Charles listens. He always has. So when it came time to confront the Sussex problem once and for all, when the quiet tension around Meghan's ongoing use of royal titles finally snapped, it wasn't William, Camilla, or the Privy Council who delivered the fatal push. It was Anne. Because sources inside the palace say the tipping point wasn't a leak, a headline, or a legal dispute. It was a private meeting, a face-to-face conversation between the king and his sister. And in that room, behind a locked door in Balmoral, Princess Anne said something that would define the next phase of Meghan's royal exile. "You've been patient long enough. It's time to act." And with those words, the Queen's most trusted child became the monarchy's quiet enforcer. So why Anne? Why now? And what was it that finally made her step out from behind the curtain and intervene? To answer that, you need to understand something most people forget and doesn't play favorites. She doesn't do public drama. She doesn't engage with gossip rags or TV interviews. Her loyalty isn't to personalities, it's to the crown. That's why she's earned a fearsome nickname among staff, the Iron Thread. Because she weaves through the monarchy, holding it together when everyone else unravels. She's been doing this for decades, but even Anne has her limits. And when she saw the latest headlines, the Times Square posters, the HRH stylings sneaking back into Meghan's public branding, that was it. That was disrespect. Not just to Charles, not even to Queen Elizabeth's memory, to the institution itself. And doesn't forgive institutional disrespect. Insiders say the meeting happened quietly. No fanfare, no leaks, no briefing papers. Just Charles and Anne, face to face, in the drawing room of Balmoral Castle. And it wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning, and reportedly brought receipts. Examples of Meghan's media appearances, transcripts, promotional materials from her upcoming projects. But she didn't slam them down. That's not her style. She laid them out calmly, surgically. "This isn't misunderstanding," she allegedly said. "It's strategy." According to one aide, and told her brother that Meghan's slow reintroduction of her royal status into her public identity wasn't random. It was calculated. She's building something, a new empire, and it leans on our name. That's what bothered Anne the most. Not the interviews, not the documentaries, not even the accusations from Montecito. It was the implied entitlement. The idea that someone could walk away from the crown, reject its duties, abandon its structure, and still dip into its prestige when convenient. That, to Anne, was unacceptable. And the only thing more dangerous than disrespect is unpunished disrespect. This wasn't the first time Anne had sounded the alarm. Sources say she raised similar concerns back in 2021 after the Oprah interview. That time, she advised a formal suspension of all Sussex branding, at least temporarily. But Charles, still hoping for reconciliation, resisted. Again in 2022, when Archetypes launched, and quietly voiced her concern about Meghan being introduced on Spotify as Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. "Why is that permitted?" she reportedly asked at a royal strategy meeting. She does not represent the monarchy. But no action was taken, and was overruled. And now, in 2025, she wasn't asking questions anymore. She was drawing a line. Her argument was simple. The Queen would never have tolerated this. And, who was by the late Queen's side through nearly every state function, knew Elizabeth's boundaries intimately, knew her protocols, knew how carefully she managed perception, and how fiercely she defended the monarchy from even the appearance of exploitation. And Meghan's current trajectory. Brand launches, event appearances, subtle title usage, would have enraged Her Majesty. This dishonors her memory, and allegedly told Charles. And that hit a nerve, because Charles, for all his modernization efforts, still measures himself against his mother's unshakable standards. And knew that, and she used it, not to manipulate, not to play politics, but to protect what the Queen left behind. There's something else that made and uniquely qualified to weigh in. She's seen this kind of thing before. Years ago, she watched as royal hangers-on tried to cash in on their proximity to power. Distant cousins turning minor lordships into speaking careers. Spouses of royal divorcees attempting to sell memoirs. Even disgraced royals trying to rebrand as philanthropists. And fought it. Every time. So when Meghan, a woman who had explicitly left the system, started circling back around to its language, its titles, its aesthetics, and saw it for what it was, the beginning of a slow re-entry, a rebranding. And if the palace didn't shut it down now, it would never be able to. So she made her case. And Charles listened. But not without cost. Because for Charles, this wasn't just a branding issue. It was about Harry. About a son who still hadn't found peace. About a family that was already broken. And didn't care about the emotion. She cared about the crown. And she said what others wouldn't. Harry made his choice. Meghan made hers. They don't get to come back in pieces. It's worth noting, and has never said a single public word against Meghan. Not once. Not in speeches. Not in interviews. Not even in subtle statements to the press. Her silence has always been strategic. But that silence, insiders say, wasn't passive. Behind the scenes, and has been one of the strongest voices in shaping the monarchy's internal policy toward the Sussexes. She reportedly refused to attend certain meetings where Meghan's projects were being discussed. She pushed back against attempts to include the Sussexes in Jubilee plans. She warned Charles that selective royalism, where people pick and choose which parts of the monarchy they want, was corrosive. And now, she finally won. Because after that Balmoral conversation, Charles gave the order. The memo was greenlit. The legal team was mobilized. The final draft was approved. And Anne's message, the one she never said publicly, was etched into the heart of it. No titles without duty. No prestige without loyalty. No crown without cost. What was Meghan's reaction? We'll get to that soon. But privately, one source says Meghan was stunned to learn that, and had been the driving force behind the restriction. She expected Camilla. Maybe William. Never Anne. Because Anne was always the quiet one. The behind-the-scenes figure. But that's the mistake people make with Princess Anne. They assume her silence is approval. It's not. It's calculation. And when she finally speaks, she doesn't miss. But now that Anne has made her move, now that the protocol is enforced and the crown has drawn its line, what's next? Because while Anne was busy shutting doors, Meghan was still building something. Something global. Something ambitious. And somewhere in Montecito, a quiet war room was forming. Because Meghan, blindsided or not, humiliated or not, was reportedly preparing her counterstrike. And it would start with a single leaked document. One that, if true, could unravel the palace's narrative completely. A memo, not from the royal household, but from inside Meghan's camp. What if the entire thing was premeditated? What if the palace had drafted rules to restrict Meghan years ago, long before the titles, the interviews, the docuseries? What if they knew she'd walk away? That's the bombshell theory erupting across the UK press after the emergence of a string of confidential emails, allegedly sent between high-ranking royal staffers, that outline a strategy, not just to limit Meghan's influence, but to neutralize it completely. And buried inside these emails was a phrase that made jaws drop on both sides of the Atlantic. The Meghan Clause. A secret term, whispered between departments, passed from one advisor to another. It wasn't public. It wasn't official. But it was real. And it proved one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. The palace had been anticipating a Meghan problem from the very beginning. And now, they were acting on it. The emails weren't supposed to be seen. They weren't leaked by a rogue staffer, a tell-all memoir, or a backdoor whistleblower. According to insiders, they were part of a data breach investigation, unrelated to Meghan, that accidentally uncovered a confidential thread archived in a palace server. When the security team reviewed the cache, they flagged several documents as sensitive. But one chain stood out. It was dated April 2020, just months after Megxit. The subject line? Post-Sussex communication structure. confidential, and the body of the message contained references to internal protocols that had never been publicly acknowledged. Not once, including a passage that read, "We may need to formalize a Meghan clause, a strategic language barrier that outlines how former senior royals may or may not engage in representational appearances or stylings. We'll need legal to weigh in, especially if commercial interests are pursued under the Duchess branding." There it was, clear as day. A full year before Meghan's first major post-royal media move, and the palace was already plotting how to contain her. So what is the Meghan clause, exactly? It's not a single document. It's a framework, a series of guidelines quietly developed after the Sandringham summit to manage what insiders feared would become the most brand-centric ex-royal narrative in modern history. Let's break that down. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family in early 2020, most assumed it was a clean break. They'd move to California, live a private life, and stay out of the limelight. But that's not what happened. Almost immediately, they launched Archewell. Then came the Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the Spotify deal, the book, the podcast, the fashion show appearance, the red carpet revivals. Each time, the titles were there. Sometimes in the credits, sometimes in the intros, sometimes implied in tone, but always present. And behind the scenes, the palace was watching. They weren't just disappointed. They were prepared. Because long before Meghan stepped on a Hollywood stage again, legal advisors had begun drafting informal branding limitations tied to post-exit protocol. And the most explosive part? Some of those early drafts included proposals to completely strip the titles if narrative exploitation became a pattern. They were never enacted. Until now. The leak didn't go unnoticed in Montecito. In fact, some believe it was deliberately timed to pressure Meghan, to let her know the palace had receipts. If that's true, it worked. Because shortly after the story broke, Meghan's legal team made quiet but significant updates to the public-facing structure of several Archewell-linked platforms. One previously archived webpage, which had introduced her as HRH the Duchess of Sussex, was updated to remove the HRH reference entirely. Another promotional deck for a children's media pitch was reportedly pulled from circulation. And perhaps most telling of all, an event coordinator working on Meghan's upcoming charity gala told press, off the record, that there were branding revisions happening behind the scenes in light of new developments. Translation? She got the message, but that doesn't mean she's backing down. Because sources say Meghan is furious, not just about the memo, or the letter, or the headlines, but about what the leak implies. Think about it. If the palace really had a Meghan clause since 2020, that means every public decision she made, every campaign, every project, every appearance, was being watched, logged, evaluated against a private rubric she never knew existed. To her, that's betrayal. To the palace, that's strategy. And the gulf between those two definitions is now fueling what insiders call the most toxic communications breakdown since Diana's divorce. Here's where things get even more twisted. Some believe the leak wasn't just a data accident. They think it was intentional. A power play. A message from inside the firm that the time for polite negotiations is over. Because leaks in royal circles don't happen by accident. Not like this. Not with this level of surgical impact. And the fact that the term Meghan clause was front and center? That's no coincidence. It's a public shaming, without ever naming her directly. A way to say, we've been preparing for you. We saw this coming. And now, we've moved to contain it. So how does Meghan respond? According to multiple sources, she's weighing legal action. Not against the palace. That would be suicidal in court. But against media outlets or third-party brands that publish or reference her using the wrong styling, as a way to reclaim the narrative. One attorney connected to her team suggested Meghan is exploring identity protection mechanisms, especially in the United States, where title recognition laws are looser. The goal? To ensure that if she can't use Duchess of Sussex as part of her formal title, no one else can weaponize it against her. It's defensive, it's messy, and it proves that this isn't just a disagreement anymore. It's a Cold War. With branding, with optics, with reputation. But let's not miss the deeper point here. What this leak really shows is that the palace doesn't just fear Meghan's voice. They fear her independence. Because Meghan is the first person in modern royal history to walk away with global recognition, personal popularity, financial independence, and her own media empire. They've never had to deal with that before. With Diana, they controlled the press. With Fergie, they froze her out. But Meghan? She has Netflix. She has Hollywood. She has fans. She has power. And that scares them. Because it means the royal family isn't the only source of authority in this story anymore. There's a rival court, a California court, and it's louder than anyone expected. Still, one question remains unanswered. Who leaked the email? Who wanted the Meghan clause to become public knowledge? And why now? Some say it was a rogue staffer, frustrated with the palace's strategy, trying to expose the hypocrisy. Others say it was internal, a deliberate leak approved by someone senior. But the most explosive theory? That it wasn't leaked from inside the palace, but from outside. From someone on the Sussex side who had access to those communications. Someone trying to prove that Meghan's persecution was premeditated. Someone who wanted to blow the whistle, not to hurt the monarchy, but to expose its playbook. And if that's true, then the next move won't come from a royal statement. It'll come from Meghan herself. Because what she says next could change everything. And no one, not even Anne, saw it coming. What happens when you try to silence a woman who built her entire brand on being heard? You get lawyers. You get fire. You get war. The palace may have laid down their rules in London, but Meghan Markle's response. That came from the sun-drenched hills of Montecito, and it wasn't polite. It wasn't deferential. And it sure as hell wasn't submissive. Because the moment Meghan realized the palace wasn't just drawing boundaries, but designing a legal muzzle, she didn't call a PR firm. She called her attorneys. And what they're preparing now isn't just a counterargument. It's a counteroffensive. With lawsuits, clauses, brand protections, international jurisdiction loopholes. In other words, the real battle has just begun. And Meghan is playing by American rules now. They say never bring a knife to a gunfight. The monarchy brought tradition, hierarchy, and symbolism. Meghan brought California attorneys. And trust us, they don't play nice. Within 48 hours of the palace's memo restricting Meghan's use of her royal titles, her legal team, led by a high-powered Los Angeles firm known for handling celebrity identity rights, had reportedly convened an emergency session. The topic? Title entitlement across jurisdictional borders. Translation? Can a royal title granted in the UK be legally restricted in the United States? Because if Meghan can't use the Duchess of Sussex in Britain, fine. But what about on American soil? What about on Netflix? What about in a Vanity Fair profile? What about in an Oprah-style special on ABC? Because if there's one thing the American system loves more than free speech, it's celebrity branding. And Meghan is both. So now her lawyers are digging hard. Here's what we know. Meghan's legal counter-strategy is based on a few very specific pillars, all centered around her right to identify herself as she chooses, regardless of her status within the royal hierarchy. Pillar 1. First Amendment protections. In the U.S., Meghan cannot be legally barred from referring to herself using a title she was legitimately granted, even if the monarchy has chosen to restrict its usage internally. In fact, as long as she doesn't present herself as an active representative of the crown, her lawyers argue it becomes a free speech issue. Can you imagine the optics of a British monarch trying to dictate how an American woman introduces herself on stage? Her team is betting the public would see that as patriarchal, outdated, even imperialistic. Which brings us to the next tactic. Pillar 2. Branding precedent. Meghan's legal team is reportedly compiling a catalog of precedent. Examples of former royals, spouses, or nobility using their titles in public, commercial, or semi-political contexts. Think Sarah Ferguson, who's still referred to as the Duchess of York, or Diana, styled as Princess of Wales, even after divorce, even without HRH. Even Wallis Simpson, decades after being ostracized, retained the title Duchess of Windsor and used it in correspondence, society functions, and estate dealings. If they could do it, Meghan's team argues, so can she. And here's the kicker. According to leaked documents, her lawyers may argue that the monarchy's selective enforcement of title usage proves bias, or worse, targeted enforcement. In legal terms, that's discrimination. In media terms, it's a PR firestorm waiting to explode. But wait, there's more. Because Meghan's camp isn't just on defense. They're preparing to go on offense. According to insiders, Her lawyers are exploring what's known as an identity misappropriation defense. That means, if anyone, a media outlet, brand, or organization, attempts to use the Duchess of Sussex in unauthorized or defamatory ways, they could face legal repercussions. It's a double-edged sword. If Meghan can't use the title, neither can anyone else. Not newspapers, not columnists, not gossip sites. Unless it's factual, respectful, and not misleading, expect lawsuits. This isn't about pettiness. It's about narrative control. And Meghan's message is clear. If you're going to take it from me, then you don't get to weaponize it either. Now let's talk optics. Because Meghan knows, as does her team, that this isn't just about law. It's about public perception. And in this chapter of the saga, Meghan is quietly shifting her image from the runaway duchess to the silenced survivor. A woman who's being punished not for scandal, not for crime, but for branding. And let's be honest, there's something deeply ironic here, isn't there? A centuries-old monarchy, run mostly by men, attempting to silence a mixed-race American woman over what she calls herself. Think about how that looks to an American audience. Think about how that plays in press headlines. And more importantly, think about how that will sound when Meghan finally speaks. Because yes, sources say she's preparing to go public. And it won't be vague. It won't be a cryptic podcast. It'll be a statement, legally crafted, emotionally charged, and globally watched. One Montecito source claims Meghan has already filmed a sit-down style segment, styled like a docuseries confession, complete with close-up camera, soft lighting, and handwritten notes on a coffee table. The subject? What I was never allowed to say. But while Meghan prepares her counter-narrative, Harry? He's spiraling. We'll cover that more in a future chapter, but here's what we know now. He's torn between loyalty and love, between tradition and rebellion. Because unlike Meghan, Harry is still technically a blood prince. The title of Duke was a gift from the Queen, but his princely status is by birth. So if Meghan fights back against title restrictions, where does that leave him? If her lawyers sue over identity misuse, and the monarchy retaliates with further restrictions, does Harry lose the only place where he's still royal? This legal counterstrike doesn't just put Meghan in the crosshairs. It puts Harry in limbo. And for a man already at war with his past, this could be the blow that breaks him. But let's not forget what this is all really about. It's not about a title. It's not about protocol. It's not even about Harry. It's about power. Who gets to define Meghan? The crown? Or Meghan herself? And when you strip away the legal language, the press statements, the royal memos, and the courtroom strategy, you're left with something very simple. A woman standing on a stage, holding a microphone, looking straight into the camera, and asking one question. If I'm not allowed to call myself what they named me, then who exactly am I now? That's the real war. Not over titles, but over identity. And Meghan? She's not done fighting. Not even close. But just as she prepares her next move, another problem is brewing. One that has nothing to do with law. Because while Meghan's lawyers were building their case, a document from 2020 was quietly reactivated. A forgotten agreement. Signed, sealed, and buried deep in the Sandringham archives. And inside it, a clause so specific, so chilling, that even Meghan's team didn't see it coming. It was the deal that ended everything. The agreement signed in the frosty January of 2020 at Sandringham, where the future of Meghan and Harry's royal life was hashed out behind locked doors, guarded gates, and bitter silences. At the time, the world was told that a cordial solution had been reached, that Meghan and Harry had agreed to step back from royal duties, that the Queen had given them her blessing to start a new life, that they would always remain beloved members of the family. But what the public never saw was the fine print. Because buried deep in the internal paperwork, in an annex that was never made public, was a clause. One line, one rule, and it's back. The palace has reportedly reactivated the hidden clause, not as retaliation, not as a new restriction, but as a reminder, a legally binding reminder that Meghan herself signed. And now, that clause has become the most dangerous weapon in the palace's arsenal. So what was this clause? Insiders say it's known informally within royal legal circles as the Royal Affiliation Restriction Provision. It sounds vague. It isn't. In simple terms, it forbids Meghan and Harry from using any royal styling, titles, or symbolic association in a way that may be construed as endorsement, representation, or affiliation with the sovereign or the royal household. Let's break that down. It means Meghan can't use her Duchess title to imply royal endorsement. It means Harry can't reference his royal status in a commercial or political capacity. It means no crests, no stylized logos, no royal-themed branding, not even in spirit. And the most shocking part? The clause has a trigger provision, a line that reportedly reads, "In the event of continued misinterpretation or reputational conflict, this provision may be publicly clarified or enforced by the sovereign or his legal representatives without prior consultation." Translation? King Charles doesn't need to ask. He doesn't need to call. He doesn't need to negotiate. He can simply enforce it, which is exactly what he just did. The implications are staggering. Because this clause, signed when emotions were raw, when Meghan and Harry were desperate for an exit, has now become a retroactive justification for the palace's memo restricting her title usage. It's not just a new rule. It's a previously agreed-upon rule, now dusted off and weaponized. And Meghan? She's reportedly furious. One insider close to the Sussex camp said, she didn't remember signing anything like that. She never saw it used before. It feels like a setup. But the palace would argue, it was always there. The clause wasn't buried in obscurity. It was part of the negotiated terms. You walked away. You signed the terms. And now, they're being enforced. The backstory behind the clause is just as chilling. According to a former legal advisor who spoke off the record, the idea of the clause was proposed not by Charles, not even by William, but by Queen Elizabeth herself. Yes, the late Queen. During the Sandringham Summit, Her Majesty reportedly insisted on adding several legal boundaries to protect the monarchy in the event that Meghan and Harry's exit became commercialized. She wasn't being petty. She was being strategic. The Queen had lived through decades of royal scandals. From Edward VIII's abdication, to Charles and Diana's divorce, to the Fergie fiasco, and even the early scandals surrounding Prince Andrew. She knew that royal fame is a double-edged sword, and that without strict parameters, Meghan and Harry could inadvertently open the monarchy to ridicule, confusion, or exploitation. So she pushed for what was called Clause 6C, which later became nicknamed the Meghan Clause by palace staffers. It was her insurance policy. And now, years later, it's finally been cashed in. What's most devastating for Meghan is this. The clause isn't just legal. It's final. Unlike newer restrictions, which could potentially be challenged or renegotiated, this clause was voluntarily signed as part of the original exit deal. And even if Meghan tries to argue coercion, misinterpretation, or ignorance, the palace has documentation, meeting notes, signatures, email confirmations, everything. So for the first time in this entire saga, Meghan may have no legal wiggle room. This isn't a media war. This isn't a PR battle. This is a contractual breach, and the palace is treating it accordingly. But how did the clause resurface? Why now? Here's the theory floating through royal insider circles. The clause was dormant, a fallback, filed away in case of future conflicts. But when Meghan's branding reemerged on children's books, charity boards, commercial sponsorships, and especially when the HRH styling appeared in promotional materials in the U.S., palace aides realized they didn't need to create new policy. They already had one. All they had to do was flip the switch. And once Charles authorized it, the clause became active, legally, publicly, permanently. The timing of this revelation is also strategic. By reactivating a previously agreed clause, the palace avoids the appearance of retaliation. They're not attacking Meghan, they argue. They're simply enforcing what she agreed to. It's the perfect move. Elegant, ruthless, indefensible. Because Meghan can fight a new restriction. She can claim bias, overreach, unfair targeting. But a clause she signed? How does she fight that? Even in the court of public opinion, it muddies the waters. Suddenly, it's not about silencing Meghan. It's about holding her to her word. And that reframes the narrative. Brilliantly. Brutally. So what now? Meghan's lawyers are scrambling. They're reportedly reviewing the full Sandringham agreement, line by line, searching for loopholes. Could the clause be challenged in a U.S. court? Was it phrased too vaguely? Was it meant for internal enforcement only? Could it conflict with Meghan's rights as a U.S. citizen? The answers aren't clear. But what is clear? The palace has outmaneuvered her, for now. And Meghan? She's cornered. Legally. Emotionally, symbolically, because the clause doesn't just restrict her title. It questions her identity. Who is she outside of that title? What is her brand, without Duchess attached to it? Is Meghan Markle enough? Or has she built an empire that only stands because of the royal foundation she now can't acknowledge? Those are the questions swirling in Montecito. And as her team scrambles to draft a response, another bomb is about to drop. Because while the clause silenced her branding, someone inside the palace just leaked a recording. A private conversation between Charles and William, a father and son, planning something far bigger than Meghan imagined. Something that could unravel everything. She gave them the stage. She gave them the spotlight. She gave them one of the most watched interviews in recent television history. And now, she's walking away. Yes, according to multiple well-placed sources in Los Angeles, Oprah Winfrey is quietly distancing herself from Meghan Markle. And the timing could not be more devastating. Just as Meghan finds herself boxed in by legal constraints, palace restrictions, and reactivated clauses, Hollywood, the very world she fled to for freedom, appears to be closing its gates. And Oprah, the queen of televised empathy, the media matriarch who once ushered Meghan into her American rebirth, she's gone quiet. Too quiet. So what happened? Why now? And what did Oprah learn or see that changed everything? Let's unravel the fallout. Because this isn't just about one woman stepping back. This is about an entire industry recalculating its risk. And Meghan? She's suddenly looking like a liability. To understand the weight of this silence, you need to rewind to 2021. That was the moment. The bombshell sit down. Meghan and Harry, seated under a tree in Montecito. Confessions of suicidal thoughts, institutional racism, and the firm as an emotionally cold machine. It was explosive. It was raw. It was culture-shaking. And at the heart of it all was Oprah, guiding the conversation, holding the space, ensuring that every answer hit like a thunderclap. The world hung on Meghan's every word. And for a moment, it felt like the tables had turned. The monarchy stumbled. Meghan soared. But now, Oprah's nowhere to be found. She hasn't commented on Meghan's recent legal troubles. She hasn't released a statement. She hasn't posted, liked, or endorsed anything Sussex-related in over 9 months. And in a town like Hollywood, silence is louder than outrage. It means something's wrong, deeply wrong. According to 2 insiders, both of whom have worked closely with Harpo Studios, Oprah was blindsided by what came after the interview. She expected fallout, controversy, pushback from the palace. But what she didn't expect, inconsistencies. Sources say Oprah's producers began receiving inquiries within days of the interview airing. Questions about timelines, facts, and whether certain details could be independently verified. Some of it was harmless. Some of it wasn't. And while Oprah never publicly challenged Meghan's narrative, she reportedly demanded clarity behind closed doors. And what she got wasn't what she expected. One insider put it bluntly. She realized she may have been used. And Oprah does not like being used. But the real fracture came in 2023 when Meghan's team began quietly pitching a follow-up series, a docuseries exploring truth, trauma, and legacy through Meghan's lens. And who was the first person they approached? Oprah. But she said no. Politely, firmly, and permanently. That's when the whispers started. She's done with Meghan. She won't go there again. She got burned once. Now, in 2025, those whispers have grown louder. Especially after the palace's memo and Meghan's escalating legal drama. And here's the twist no one saw coming. It's not just Oprah. Across the board, Meghan's once loyal Hollywood allies are backing away. Studio execs, PR reps, talk show hosts, even celebrity friends who once gushed about her in interviews are avoiding the topic. Why? Because Meghan Markle, once the symbol of royal rebellion, feminist freedom, and glamorous reinvention, is now being branded as something far more complicated, unstable, litigious, risky. And in Hollywood, risky is the kiss of death. Sources inside WME, the talent agency that briefly represented her, say Meghan's team has faced multiple rejections over the past year. Producers declining to attach her to new projects, networks passing on unscripted concepts, and publicists advising clients not to appear too closely affiliated. And the reason is always the same. The titles, the drama. The unpredictability. One producer who worked on a Netflix project involving Meghan said, "Every time we tried to lock down branding, there was a new headline from the UK."